Welcome back, everyone, to the Unsportsmanlike Conduct Podcast, the podcast for the average Joe that covers football, my beloved New York Giants, some baseball and basketball from time to time, and any other current events impacting our sports world. Before I get into the agenda, everyone, please follow me on Instagram. That's _unsportsmanlike_conduct. Again, that's _unsportsmanlike_conduct. Also, if you're listening to this episode, you might as well subscribe. So please go ahead and follow my YouTube page. Lastly, I'm on Twitter now, so please follow me on Twitter. That's _unsportsman. Again, that's _unsportsman. So the agenda for today is a topic that I've wanted to talk about for a very, very long time. It's the fact that the NBA has gotten predictable, less competitive, and very stale over the last several years. And I thought it was perfect timing to discuss this topic, discuss my thoughts on the NBA after earlier this week during the lottery selection when all the New York Knicks fans found out that they weren't going to be picking number one overall in this year's 2019 NBA draft. There's an outcry all over New York for all of New York Knicks fans. It was a topic of discussion with respects to basketball. First Take was all over it. Undisputed was all over it. Around the Horn was all over it. All of those key shows on ESPN and Fox Sports were all over this. The fact that the New York Knicks will not be able to draft Zion Williams because they landed the number 3 overall pick and not the number 1 overall pick. And that's my issue with the NBA. There's not enough talent in the NBA to grow teams organically. That's why every single year there is a free agent that is expected to jump, go into a new team, and then teams are also sort of methodically and slowly trying to build super teams. Not equally to, LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, and Chris Bosh on several years ago with that Miami Heat team. Not necessarily up to that caliber, but they're slowly trying to create some sort of form or version of that. And we've seen that, consistently with the Rockets. The Rockets are actually willing to pay the luxury tax this coming season to see if they can land another big player. There's rumors out with Kyrie Irving and KD teaming up to go to the New York Knicks. But it was perfect timing because New York Knicks fans were so distraught at the fact that they won't be picking number 1 overall. But see, that's the issue. With the NBA, there's not enough talent in the NBA to organically rebuild a team. That's why every single year, it's very predictable for the NBA playoffs. Everyone knows who's going to really be in it, who's going to make it to the finals, and probably this is the first year we don't see LeBron James in the NBA playoffs. So that's the only reason why we don't see him in the finals this year. And thankfully, he left conferences. Imagine he would have jumped in any other team in the Eastern Conference. No one would care how well Giannis is doing. No one would care that Kawhi has literally single-handedly led this Raptors team to the Eastern Conference Finals. Because LeBron James would be there leading another team as well if he was still in the Eastern Conference. Did people really expect the Houston Rockets to really beat the Golden State Warriors? But before I get off track, I really want to focus on the draft. Players are not ready for the NBA when they get drafted. That's why every single year there's literally only up to 5 players that are highly coveted. Actually, no, there are maybe 1 to 2 players that are highly coveted, and then the remaining 3 or 4 players within that top 5, top 6, 7 picks are sort of slightly coveted players. And then after that, the rest of the draft pool is trash. It's garbage. You can't build around in the NBA draft. Teams tank as part of their mission statement every single year, and they end up landing within the top 10. And they consistently hit and miss on their picks. Swing and miss on their draft picks. It's very hard in the NBA to rebuild a team organically because these players in college, they're these scrawny athletes. They're not ready for the NBA game. In college, it's legitimately a team sport. The ball moves around. Players move around in an offensive system. These guys come into the NBA and they can't even lead a team. Some of these guys that were averaging 10, 15, 20 points sometimes don't even get any burn. So many more busts come out of the NBA draft that sort of I can remember than NFL players. I mean, the NBA, how often do you see a team that has a top 10 pick in the NBA draft be able to make it to the playoffs the very next year or in 2 years because of that player that they drafted in the NBA draft? It rarely happens. And the thing with NBA players or rather these college players that get drafted, we have to wait for that player to develop and mature their own game for about a couple of years in the NBA before we actually see everything come into fruition. Before, teams can decide, okay, this is the actual cornerstone piece of our team. Let's add additional pieces around him. I don't know what it is with the NBA, and that's the reason why it's a lack of talent at the collegiate level that NBA teams fail to rebuild their teams organically. Very few teams can do that. I think the Boston Celtics were very successful with rebuilding through the draft and key free agent signings in trades. I thought the Portland Trailblazers sort of did that, and we all know that the Golden State Warriors did a tremendous job doing that. OKC did that several years ago when they had Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, and James Harden. Think about that. Those are 3 of the top 10 NBA players. OKC was able to do that. And then what happened after that? After KD left, after James Harden left, the Thunder had to wait for Paul George. They had to sign Paul George instead of rebuilding and drafting the right way. In the NBA, you cannot draft the right way. It is very hard for teams to draft methodically and be right on their draft picks year in and year out to make sure that their teams remain competitive. So you know what ends up happening? The select few teams that had their shit together with their draft picks, that were able to splurge in free agency, are the main core teams every single year that dominate the NBA. I mean, give me a break. Do people really think the Portland Trailblazers are going to beat the Golden State Warriors? Even without Durant, I knew there was no way that the Portland Trailblazers could beat the Warriors. Okay, Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum are a great backcourt, but they are nowhere near as great as Steph Curry and Klay Thompson. And they are nowhere near as lethal, the way they move around to get open for the ball, the way they can create their own shot, the way their offensive systems are built for both of those guys to just go off at any second. It is a completely different style of play versus the backcourt with CJ McCollum and Damian Lillard. With CJ McCollum and Damian Lillard, it's literally either one of them is at the top of the key and it's dribble, and then shoot within 10 to 5 seconds left on the shot clock. With Steph Curry and Klay Thompson, they can create shots for other people. They move around within the system. Sometimes Draymond Green can play point and find those guys open. And those guys are willing to drive to the basket off of screens and picks. They are not comparable to the backcourt of Portland Trailblazers. So I knew right off the bat, I'm like, okay, great. Portland Trailblazers are advancing to the Western Conference Finals. They beat the Denver Nuggets. That's great and all, but there's no way they were going to beat the Warriors. I mean, I don't care about Giannis. I don't care about Kawhi. Because when they make it to the finals, they're not going to beat the Warriors. These teams aren't good enough to beat the Warriors. And then, before the Warriors became a dynasty, who was the teams? It was whatever team LeBron James is on, whether that was the Cavaliers or the Miami Heat. And then the Spurs were dominant. The Spurs have been dominant for such a long time. Obviously, when the Lakers in their heyday were a dominant team for a very long time. Look at all the other teams. I mean, the NBA is currently in a crisis, and something needs to change. I think the change could happen at the collegiate level. Require these athletes to stay in college for at least maybe 2 years. Let these kids develop and grow. It's very different than the NFL. Because in the NFL, you can have a rookie quarterback come in and literally lead that team to a playoff spot. There are sometimes rookie players or first or second year players that are usually lead in their respective categories from a statistic standpoint. And then within 2 to 3 years, they become a top 5 in their position. You don't see that with the NBA. With the NBA, you have your players that have been dominant for that decade. And every single year, you see the same players, top 5 in assists, top 5 in rebounds, steals, blocks, points. Whereas in the NFL, you have young quarterbacks leading in their statistics, landing in the top 10, top 5. Guys like Deshaun Watson, Patrick Mahomes, Baker Mayfield. I mean, those guys, after a year or two, NFL teams know this is the guy that's going to lead that team. I mean, some of them are arguably, analysts probably think that Deshaun Watson and Patrick Mahomes are top 10 quarterbacks in the league. We've seen it with Russell Wilson also, several years ago when he came into the league as a third-round pick. Took the starting job out of who I believe was Matt Flynn, who actually just recently had signed a major contract with the Seattle Seahawks. Earned the starting gig for the Seattle Seahawks. Led them to a Super Bowl. 2 Super Bowls. Right? I mean, it's like, you don't see that with the NBA. You see, again, wide receivers coming out of college. Within a year or two, they end up leading in total yards or receptions, touchdowns. Look at running backs: Saquon Barkley, Ezekiel Elliott, Alvin Kamara, Todd Gurley. Those 4 running backs, Christian McCaffrey, those 5 running backs just got into the league not too long ago. And they are arguably the best offensive players in the NFL. How often do you see that in the NBA? What recent player that's been drafted that people are considering them as top 5 in their position? You don't see that a lot. A lot of the people in the NBA that are top 5 in their positions have been in this league for over 5 years. And the great thing about the NBA, the great thing about the NFL versus the NBA, no position in the NFL is obsolete. Every position matters. You need to have talent at every single position, or it's hard to win in the NFL. With the NBA, you don't need to have a great center anymore. The NBA has changed so drastically that you don't even need to have a center anymore. And so I think that's also another reason why teams can't grow organically, because they're looking for the next Steph Curry. They're looking for, the next shooter, the guy that, or the next guard, the next best wing player to build off of. Remember back in the early and mid 2000s, you needed a good power forward and a good center, offensively gifted and defensively gifted power forwards and centers. Those 2 guys needed to be great on both sides of the ball for you to have a legitimate, complete team. And your point guard didn't need to be this amazing scorer, but the point guard needed to be a great distributor, a great leader, and then you needed just one good wing player. Now, everyone needs to be able to score 20, 30 points at any given night for you to remain competitive. And this whole thing with the super teams, that's forced that. That none of these teams look like they're teams. Because you're just getting all these star players and throwing them into this one sort of system. And that's why that's why players' stats drop. That's why players, no longer can get their rhythm or their groove anymore. It worked well with the Warriors because the Warriors always had a system. The Warriors weren't a super team. They just grew organically and then said, you know what? We need to make sure that we don't face Kevin Durant anymore, so we're just going to sign him. But they didn't even need to sign him. In the NFL, every single position is important. If you don't have good offensive linemen, you have to address it in the upcoming NFL draft. If you don't have a good defensive lineman, if you can't stop the run or you can't get to the quarterback, what do they do in the NFL draft? They draft a edge rusher or a big body nose tackle. If you can't defend the pass, what do? They do the same thing. They draft for those positions. In the NBA, you don't draft at position levels anymore. You draft at best player available. But then when you look at the NBA draft, how many good players are there available? If you don't land in the top 5, from a draft lottery standpoint, you might as well tank all over again. That's why the best teams don't even care about their draft picks. The guys that are after, 20 and 30, that pick between 20 and 30 in the NBA, do their rookies even start? I mean, their guys don't even start. Because they know that the core that they have, whether it was created through a major blockbuster trades or free agent splurging, is the core or the core members that are going to lead that team for the next 3 to 5 years, which is a big mistake that the Los Angeles Lakers were about to do. The Los Angeles Lakers have a good young core: Kuzma, Brandon Ingram, Lonzo Ball, and Josh Hart. And the thing with the NBA, they're so quick to give up on talent. Because the NBA is so typical of a let's get rich quick. And so they want to trade their future for a win now. And that's why so many teams try to, when they build super teams and those super teams hit a wall, these teams don't end up being sustainable. They don't have longevity. Every super team has their window lasts between 3 to 5 years. And between that 3 to 5 years, at most, they'll get 2 championships. But they give away their future. And the thing with the NFL is, if they had a core similar, a young group of guys that had a promising future, like Lonzo Ball, Brandon Ingram, Kyle Kuzma, Josh Hart, if they had a core like that from an NFL team perspective, the NFL teams would never trade those guys because they value that young talent way more than the NBA values their own young talent. So much that the NFL teams overvalue their young players based off of potential. Whereas the NBA doesn't. The NBA is just like, hey, Lonzo Ball has shown us this. Brandon Ingram has shown us this. Kyle Kuzma has shown us this. You either like it or you don't, but we want to trade all this for AD. And watch what happens. If that trade ever did happen, watch if AD ever goes to the Los Angeles Lakers and the Los Angeles Lakers trade those young core pieces, I guarantee you LeBron James will get one more championship with AD, and then that Los Angeles Lakers will be that dumpster fire team that they have been the last several years. Super teams are not sustainable. And I think that's sort of what's crippled the NBA, but I understand why the NBA, as a whole, is very sort of eager and trigger happy on creating these super teams because there's not enough talent from a collegiate level. There's not enough talent entering the NBA draft. I mean, who cares if you have, in the NFL, you can find talent anywhere. Even in the third round, even your third, fourth, and fifth rounds are so important in the NFL draft. But in the NBA, if you're not within the top 5 or a top 10 pick, you might as well trade those picks away. There's no such thing as draft capital in the NBA. People don't care about draft capital. It's ridiculous, and it's just not good basketball to watch anymore. There's no story. There's just no more story. There's nothing throughout the season that wants to keep me engaged. I don't care that James Harden is averaging an insane amount of points. I don't care that Russell Westbrook got triple doubles. The NBA is very player-centric, and it's not team-centric. Whereas with the NFL, you see surging teams, new teams every single year. New teams getting the wild card spot. New teams being division leaders. And that's another important thing about the NFL, which is why it's so exciting. There's always a couple of teams that are in the fight to win their division. In the NBA, people don't care about that. There's no division rivalries. Rivalries happen because if you end up knocking a team out of the playoffs. Rivalries don't happen or don't get sustained throughout the regular season because no one cares about divisions. It's like it doesn't matter who you lose against. In the NFL, you can't afford to lose to your division teams. You have to have a good record against your division teams. That's why Redskins fans don't like Giants fans and the New York Giants. Right? That's why the whole NFC East hates the Cowboys. That's why I hate the Philadelphia Eagles. I mean, there's legitimate hate for these teams. Whereas in the NBA, no one cares. No one cares about that stuff. Because there's just and also it's just so many games, and also you just have to land within the top 8 of your conference, and you'll make it to the playoffs. No one cares about a division title. But in the NFL, division titles are so important. And there have been times where there have been teams barely over 500 just never ever making the cut because the NFL is so competitive. We've had teams, just 500 or below 500 make it into the NBA playoffs. You will never see that in the NFL. There's just a better standard and a better level of overall product in the NFL. The stories are always more engaging. And a while ago I mentioned the fact that new up-and-coming players can be dominant in their positions and be considered one of the better athletes or players within their positions coming out of college within 1 to 2 to 3 years. In the NBA, you don't get that. And I wanted to reiterate this point because we just saw Patrick Mahomes in year 2, which was technically his first full year as a quarterback playing all 16 games, not only win MVP, but throw 50 goddamn touchdowns. How do you win? And he almost beat the New England Patriots. The reason why the Kansas City Chiefs didn't beat the New England Patriots was because the Kansas City Chiefs couldn't defend a goddamn thing. Pat Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs, Pat Mahomes, year 2, which is his first full year, his first real year in the NFL season, almost took down the New England Patriots. When do we see that in the NBA? An upcoming player, a new first-year player, doing that and leading his team to a deep playoff run. We almost never see that. We're all hyped about Luka and Trae Young. But let's be honest, those guys aren't going to lead their teams into a deep playoff run anytime soon. I don't expect it to. And the difference between like the Milwaukee Bucks and Giannis making a deep run and Kawhi Leonard and the Raptors making a deep run, LeBron James isn't in the Eastern Conference Finals. And also the Eastern Conference doesn't have a super team. And that's why the Eastern Conference has been a little bit more competitive and the stories have been a little bit more compelling rather than the Western Conference. I think we're seeing more better basketball in the Eastern Conference because the lack of super teams in the Eastern Conference. But then there was this rumor out there that they may trade Ben Simmons for LeBron James. Look, if you do that, you are ruining the future for the 76ers. Ben Simmons is the ticket. Ben Simmons is the future of that team. You need to keep a guy like Ben Simmons. You can work on a jump shot. I'm sure Ben Simmons by now knows that's something he's got to work on in order for him to take that team to the next level. But if they end up trading Ben Simmons for LeBron James, that will be the biggest mistake the 76ers make. Because LeBron James is getting a year older. And also, we've seen LeBron James play with talented big men. We've seen him with Bosh. We've seen him with Kevin Love. When LeBron James plays with all-star, premier big men, their impact and performance on the game gets marginalized. And that's the same thing that's going to happen with Joel Embiid. And if you think that Jimmy Butler will remain with the 76ers in the event that the 76ers got LeBron James, there's no way Jimmy Butler will be happy with another ball-dominant wing player. It just wouldn't work out. So I advise the 76ers to tread carefully and not do this deal. Because they have a core young talent. They can afford to lose Jimmy Butler. If Jimmy Butler wants to walk and go sign with another team, you can let him do that. But you can't afford to let Embiid walk or guys like Simmons walk. All right? NBA teams need to stop, falling for this get-rich-quick scheme. And, sort of think about the future. Invest in the future. Get core talent. Which is what the NFL always does. Every team in the NFL does that. Their primary core players are the young players that they got through the draft. And then they also try to sign free agents where they can plug in the holes. But very rarely is an NFL team comprised of all of big major signings. And there's way less collusion in the NFL than there is in the NBA in terms of teaming up and going to some one big major team. And that's why I've always gravitated towards the NFL, and that's why I've loved football so much. That's why I became a fanatic. That's why I became a maniac about football, because it was always engaging. I was always engaged. I was always interested in every single new team, every single new player. I was always hooked. But with the NBA, once I kind of caught on, okay, LeBron James is going to make it to the finals, the Warriors will make it to the finals, or, we'll have some years where the Spurs make it. Once I sort of caught on to that trend, it didn't matter to me. I didn't have to follow the NBA season anymore. Because, for an NBA player to win MVP, to me, that just becomes so insignificant. Russell Westbrook's triple-doubles have become so insignificant. James Harden, going on these, 30-point tears, that becomes insignificant. Because there's just so many not so many super teams, but the few super teams that there are going to dominate the league, are going to dominate in the playoffs and go all the way. And that's the consistent theme in the NBA. I just want good competitive basketball again. I miss the days where Tracy McGrady had to literally lead the Houston Rockets to win a game. I miss the days where it was just Kobe Bryant and then he had, Bynum and Gasol. But you knew that if Kobe Bryant didn't drop 25 plus, this Lakers team couldn't win a championship. I just miss those days where it was one player and then maybe a B player and then good enough sort of role players that are plugged in and are doing the good enough job to help propel that team to win a championship or make a deep run in the playoffs. But you don't see that anymore. And then other great players, guys like Damian Lillard, their impact on the game, their performance in the playoffs, it gets minimalized. People forget about it so quickly because now they're about to get swept by the Warriors. It's unfortunate, and the NBA needs to be fixed. And you know what? I may not even be that tuned into the finals. Because why am I going to watch something that's that's predictable? See, wrestling is scripted, but wrestling isn't predictable like the NBA is. The NBA is more predictable than the WWE is. It's way harder for me to sort of figure out who's going to win a match, even after reading all the blogs and rumors, than the NBA, because the NBA is just so top heavy. I think that's the perfect way to sort of categorize the NBA. The NBA is so top heavy. There's no middle tier talent that can overtake the top talent. And for a fact, 7th and 8th seed teams will never upset the 1st and 2nd seed teams in the playoffs. But we've seen instances in the NFL where a wild card team makes it to the Super Bowl and wins the Super Bowl. I just want a better distribution of competition and talent across all 30 NBA teams. That's all I'm asking for. I want some exciting storylines, some sort of surprises, because that's what's missing in the NBA. And I think, honestly, until the NBA gets that back, it's going to be a little hard for me to be a diehard NBA fanatic the way I am for the NFL. And folks, that's it. That wraps it up. That was episode 8. Thanks for tuning in. Again, please make sure you follow me on Instagram. That's _unsportsmanlike_conduct. Again, that's _unsportsmanlike_conduct. Also, as you're done listening to this, please drop some comments, like my YouTube video, and also make sure you subscribe. And then lastly, I'm also on Twitter, so please follow my Twitter page. That's at _unsportsman. Again, that's at _unsportsman. Peace out until next time.
The podcast you just heard was made using Anchor. Ever thought about making your own podcast? Anchor makes it really easy for anyone to get started. It's a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing podcasts. Best of all, it's 100% free. Sign up now at anchor.fm/new. That's anchor.fm/new to get started.